everyone, and welcome to the Jeff Bullish Show. Today I have with me Luis Garcia. Now, Luis is a seasoned international executive with over 25 years' experience in technology, digital media, and education. In fact, one of the universities he was involved with in Orlando, in the USA, was a university that I came across as one of the first, what could we say, one of the first digital online universities in the world. And Luis was actually one of the founders and of that. So a little bit more about Luis. He specializes in driving new ventures and products to rapid growth by building effective teams that harnesses innovation, technology, and creativity to solve complex problems. He is the president of PETE, P-E-T-E, an Orlando-based tech startup that offers a suite of cost-effective and customizable solutions that enable organizations to deliver personalized workforce learning at scale. And with my background in education, I am intrigued by how can we teach better, faster, and with online courses. So obviously this is a passion of Luis's. So a little bit more about him. The PETE team is dedicated to harnessing the power of AI to help organizations of all sizes optimize their training initiatives spanning from onboarding to regulatory compliance, product knowledge, technical skills, and more. Before joining PETE, Luis made substantial contribution to Full Sail University over nearly 20 years. And I did see Full Sail, actually, as I said before, in about 2011, 2012, and I was intrigued by the fact that they were moving very much to online education. Also, his tenure as Vice President of Full Sail Online marked a transformative area for the institution where he has helped establish as a pioneer in online education and significantly expanded the reach of its programs. Later, as VP of Emerging Technologies, Luis facilitated a strategic shift from students using tech as a creative tool to becoming architects and originators of new tech, ensuring the university stayed ahead of rapidly evolving industry trends. Luis holds a Bachelor of Science in System Engineering from Universidad Metropolitana in Venezuela. I think I said that, just screwed that right up in terms of just doing that, but I don't speak Venezuelan very well. Sorry, Luis. An associate degree in digital media from Full Sail University, got that right, and an MBA from the Fuqua, hope I got that right, School of Business. You don't want to get that one wrong, at Duke University, one of the top 10 business schools in the United States. Luis, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here, and we're going to dive into how to use AI for online learning, creating courses, and I am very, very curious. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and I really appreciate to be here, and I can't wait to tell you more. So before I tell you how we use PETE, I'd like to give you a little context and for you and your audience about the evolution of digital education. So if we move from traditional education where people come into a classroom, everyone sitting at the same time with an instructor and that owns the information and teaches and evaluates their students, that is education as most of us knew it 20 plus years ago. And one of the obvious problems of that model is that it's synchronous. And so people needed to be in this particular space in front of this particular person at this particular time. So digital education solved that problem, and by breaking the timing at which you needed to be in front of the structure. And that marked that significant departure from traditional education. And whereas now the education was accessible at any point. So it solved the accessibility problem really, really well. But it created a couple of new problems that didn't exist before. And one was that in the traditional education, if you had a very engaging instructor in front of you, the materials, the education materials almost don't matter. And if people feel connected to that person, and that person is a good performer, and he can transmit those ideas, you feel that you're getting a really good education. And when you broke that that connection, now the educational materials themselves become really, really important because they are the ones doing the teaching, and the instructor is more like a curator and a facilitator and a mentor in that scenario.
Yep.
So, and I think a lot of people learned this during the pandemic. If you are not really adept at making that transformation on how you reach learning outcomes without this person talking to you or in front of you, and but you have to have these offline materials doing the teaching, then the learning experience can be very deficient. So that's one problem that was introduced. And the other problem that was introduced, so I would say enhanced, because it was already a problem, was the other side of the learning equation, which is the evaluation of learning. And so how do I know my students actually learn, right?
Yep.
So historically, at some point, somebody invented tests, pieces of paper where people answer the questions, and they were very efficient for the instructor because it's easy for them to do the qualifications, but it's not a very effective tool to actually evaluate learning because it's a very artificial situation. We don't go through life with not asking people about how to solve a problem, and the problems are not fully framed, and you only have 2 hours to solve them. This is a very artificial situation. And when we came to online, that problem wasn't really solved. It actually got worse because the ratios of instructor to students are much larger. And now we can automate this test. And so now the instructor doesn't even have to put any effort into it. I just put a bunch of questions in there, multiple choice, and people choose, and the computer can compute that very easily. So those are the 2 problems that I wanted to focus on when it came to PEAT. So how do we solve the problem creating and training-ready materials that people can learn from? And the distribution problem is already solved. So you got a learning management system. You can put the courses in there, and people can take it from there. And then how do we evaluate learning? And how do we apply this to the places where people are expecting training, that is corporations or companies, but it's really hard to do. So what we did is that this process of translating expertise into training materials is called instructional design. And people hire people to do that, to talk to subject matter experts and try to absorb their knowledge and try to turn them into training materials. We use generative AI to do that. And so companies can provide any training materials they already had, or any processes that they already had, any knowledge that they already had, and our software will turn that into courses automatically.
Right.
And now it's very, very important in this process we capture the point of view of the instructor or the expert, because we're in the world now where anybody can generate a course with some effort because of generative AI. And so in a world where everybody can generate a course, what really matters is the point of view of the expert. So trying to capture that point of view is very, very important in the process of training the AI to create courses. But we also like to capture the actual physical voice of the person, and because it's better when you can read and listen. And so we clone the voice of the instructor as well and use it as part of the materials.
Right.
Then all those courses land in our platform, and then employees can go get the courses from there and track their learning. But the third portion of the second part of the equation, of the learning equation, is what I get most excited about, which is evaluation of learning. We call that assessment and education. So now we have an engine can take that knowledge that we use, that we vectorize to creating the courses, and now I can have an engaging conversation one-on-one with each learner, asking them questions about the materials and re-asking questions based on what they answer. And like a teacher could be able to do in a classroom, but it would be very hard to have deep conversations with every single student. We can use generative AI and conversational AI to do that. And we also can take that same technology and then create situations. And so the engine can ask the student, and if we are in a training environment for call centers, for instance, okay, there's a customer that is calling with this problem, and then what do you say? How do you answer? And the learner can answer, and they can continue that conversation and then give an assessment of, how they did.
Yep.
And so those are the three components that we try to address: the creation of content, the distribution of content, and the evaluation of learning.
Right. That's awesome, because I think we've moved from, I grew up as, well, my first career was a secondary teacher. I stood in front of a class. I presented to, high school students across a range of, sometimes you're thrown in to teach, a part of an area that, like geography, that maybe you'd done years ago, but then you suddenly were thrown into the classroom and had to teach that. Textbooks, that were offline, as analog. Then you had to do assessments. I remember spending time at night ticking, going through essays, making qualitative judgments about an essay. And it's tough. And as a teacher, I lasted about 5 or 6 years in the classroom and decided that I really didn't want to do this anymore, because I was teaching, number one, people that don't want to learn generally and don't want to be there, except they want to have fun. They're called teenagers. But then you're talking more about corporate training, which is another thing. And also, when I started the website blog and started writing about social media, digital marketing back in 2009, I found a very engaged audience, which is people that wanted to learn. Okay, having to learn and wanting to learn are two different things. That raises the question. You're sort of maybe in between both of those, that tension, wouldn't you? So like, I've joined this company, they're going to give me this course. Oh God, I've just got to do it. Others go, gee, I'm really interested in digital marketing. How do I do a better job as a digital marketing, head of digital marketing at company A? So how do you handle that with the courses, and how do you make courses not just informational and educational, but actually make them entertaining so people are motivated? How do you do that?
So learning motivation is a really important aspect of the learning process. So you're absolutely right. People have different motivations to pursue learning, and sometimes it's not because they want to, it's because they have to, and sometimes it's because it's for enrichment. Sometimes it's for just general knowledge, and so changing the motivation of a learning is a very hard thing. I couldn't even fathom thinking about how to do that. But what we can do, and is start to engage that learner and meet them when they are. And so with our technology, we can start experimenting with hyper personalization. So even if a company has let's say a onboarding course that they prepare with our technology, that course has certain learning outcomes that the learners have to meet, like knowing the history of the company, who's the management, what are the goals. Let's say those are normal takeaways from a onboarding course. We have the capability then to say, okay, if the person coming to take the course is, let's say, an engineer, and then the language and examples that I may use may be different than the person taking the course is from the finance department, and then be able to transform the course in a way to meet that learner, and where they can be more engaged. So in traditional education, even in normal digital education, you wouldn't be able to do that, because that basically means I got to create 2 different courses, even if I have only 2 profiles coming in. With technology like ours, you can design one course for one learning outcomes and actually deliver it differently. And
Right.
So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it, which we are not there yet, but it's somewhere I really want to be, is when you do an evaluation of learning, and there are going to be learning gaps. There are certain things that you're going to learn and assimilate better than others. And those learning gaps have to be addressed. Very few times you have the capabilities to addressing individual learning gaps. I do think that the future is not too far in which I'm going to be able to, the technology to identify the learning gaps and then create micro modules that address them immediately.
Immediately. Yep. Okay.
and based on that, on the profile of that learner and how much they know. And that is still, I don't think will change the motivation of a learner, but for sure, it's going to make sure that they maximize that time.
Yeah. Yeah. So, because I noticed in your overview of, Pete, that you mentioned things like regulatory compliance. In other words, as a corporation, you're going to have to meet certain requirements as part of government, regulations. So obviously, no one's going to be that excited about that, really. So motivation from doing regulatory compliance is a bit like poking your eyes with a sharp stick, but that's okay. It's just part of the game. But can you take us through what is the process to create a course using your platform? Because I'm intrigued by that, because we have a little project which is on pause at the moment, which is I've got a framework for something I'm really motivated about. It's called the Freedom Code. It's got 5 pillars. Then we've got a whole lot of things like email marketing, digital marketing, social media marketing, content marketing, a whole bunch of different things that sit that which is great. Where do you start when you go to create a course, and how does Pete enable that process and make it and then produce a fantastic course out of that? Can you take us through the steps?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, let's take the regulation example, because that is not fun for the learner or the creator. And so no one really wants to do that. And that is a perfect example to have a machine help you do it. And
Yes.
because it's so dry. But the advantage of the regulation course is that most of the material somebody wrote. And if it's a government requirement, there's probably already a regulation that exists that you can use as a starting point. So everything in generative AI is, and that's not different in our platform, is about input and refinement.
Right.
And so that's where the bulk of the work is going to go into, finding the right inputs and spending the right time in refinement, which at the end is less time in the process that you would through traditional process. Now, if I was going to do a course about a particular regulation and for a particular company, then I will have to learn that regulation, then do research into the best and worst cases of that regulation, spend a lot of time in research trying to find all that.
Yep.
And then I will have to somehow synthesize that whole thing into an outline that will reflect the learning outcomes that I want to reach. And I've been involved in hundreds of courses creation over my years in education. And that process, for people that are really good at it, it can take a few weeks. And they do a lot of refinement, because that's the hardest part. Go on doing the research, finding the materials, synthesizing the information, getting into an outline.
Yep.
With Pete, you still will have to go and find those materials, but then you just give it to our platform, and then you push a button, and 30 seconds later, you have an outline.
Wow. Yep.
And now it's the first draft of the outline. So I did the input portion, and now I have to work in the refinement. Is that the right outline? So the right modules, are they in the right order? And things like that. So you can generate and keep generating until you get the right outline that involves what are the modules, what are going to be lessons, what are going to be the assessments, what are going to be the learning outcomes of each one of those. Mm-hmm. Then when you're happy with that, then you will push another button, and then it will create the outline of every single one of those lessons first.
Yep.
And what is the title? What is the order? And then you want to go and generate each one of those individually. Now, the order in which you develop those is important, because in education, we have something called scaffolding. Sometimes you need a piece of knowledge first before you can ask for another piece of knowledge on top of that. And there's prerequisites on the knowledge. So we call that scaffolding. So making sure you're doing the right order is important. So we can do it either one by one. And then inside of those lessons, you can even add more input of additional materials and context just about that lesson. Or you can push a button and let it do it all at once. And when you do it all at once, then it starts with the first lesson. And then after you finish the first lesson, use that as an input for the second lesson,
Mm-hmm.
and go, so on and so forth. Depending on the number of modules that you have, it'll take a few seconds or a few minutes. And then you go into refinement of each one of those lessons. And is that the right topic? Do I have some other materials that I want to bring in for more content? Maybe I have already a video that already explains something really well, and then I bring it in and put it in there, some images. I can also set up a particular template so it looks with the branding of my company, things like that. And then you can either use a default voice that we have, or you can, in another part of the tool, it will also take an input of your voice, and then it will generate all those lessons. It will generate every single slide with the images. It will create graphs if there was data in there that require graphs. It will require the notes of each one of those slides that narrates that, and then it will take the voice and make them speak those notes.
Right.
And so once you have all your lessons, then you start working with the tool in creating the assessments. And now the assessment can be traditional, a knowledge check when you ask a question and give them some options. And or it can be a simulation. You can say, okay, now I want to speak to the learner and ask him questions about this general topic. And I want you to evaluate his answers. And before you show him the next lesson. And so all in all, the first course can take a few weeks because there's a lot of heavy lifting to training the AI. And but for our customers that have been with us for a few months, they get into a good cadence if they had a large library of content that they want to do, and they can be as fast as a course every couple of weeks, which is, in my experience, pretty damn good. And you're happy if you have a course every couple of months in traditional methods.
Yeah.
And a course every other week or every 10 days is pretty good. But it requires that you go through this heavy lifting at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating, because the challenge is like AI, which you're obviously using generative AI to actually create outlines and summaries and distill that noise into outline. And then next question is, can you provide, then you've got each module, then within each module, then is an outline for each module. The other part I rather like is, okay, once you've done that, and this is where we get the human and the machine working together, isn't it? So there's this intersection of the machine and human, which is something that fascinates me. So, and what I rather like too, was you mentioned the fact that it turns it into a presentation, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, and it's mobile friendly as well.
Okay. Great. So the other thing, part of that is then the using an avatar, you actually then clone the voice of the presenter. Okay. Do you clone the visual video of the presenter as well? Is that part of what you do as well, or is it just?
Yes, it can be part, and we don't use it a lot. I find it very distracting. Even when I had a production team with actual cameras, a talking head is probably good for a few seconds on camera, and then he's just weird.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, and so the experiments we've been doing and nobody has asked for it will be more talking heads comes in, introduction, I'm going to talk about you, and then take it away, and I use the voice and get into the content.
Right.
And
okay. Now, the other question I have around this is training. Training, or using the software, your tech, your platform to actually go and get the information. Is that essentially, number one, is that done just using internal resources of a company, for example? Like quite often a company has a lot of information in people's heads and brains, but it's never been written down. Okay, so, and on the other hand, there's some that's a lot of information out there. So, for example, my blog website, I think, has about 4,000 articles now. It's got about 6-7 million words. I've got 225 podcast interviews and videos and audio that'll go along with that, and transcripts. So where do you get the information from? Is it all internal, or do you go out onto the web and do some scraping and collating and distilling of that as well?
Right. So that's a great question. So as I said before, everything is about input and refinement. So for certain, we want as much proprietary input as humanly possible. Now, you're right. Some companies have very well described, procedures and policies and things like that that we can just grab and ingest, and some others have nothing. And so we get sometimes very creative with that, and asking, well, have you delivered this training via Zoom? And you happen to have recorded it. And many times they have actually done that, even if they didn't have materials to support it. If they have materials to support it, we'll definitely take those. If they don't, then we'll take that recording and use tools to turn them into a transcript and use it as input.
Right.
And because again, that point of view of the expert is super important. Now, there are topics that there's plenty of information out there that you need to have a point of view. And for instance, a sexual harassment course. And in that case, we probably don't need a lot of input. There's plenty out there on regulation and materials. And if you don't give the tool any input, then it will go and try to get the information out in the public web for you to build. The important thing there is that the creator is in control. You still need to read that content and approve it and make sure that it's accurate and it's transmitting what you want to transmit before you put it in front of a learner.
Right. Cool. So essentially using a combination of internal information as well as and content as well as external information where required. That leads to some issues like copyright. So how do you deal with that?
I'm so glad you asked. And so what we decided as a company, a couple of things. Number one, that we'll isolate the data of every customer to only their instance. And so that means we don't send data out to training public large language models. And we also don't use it to train our own. And it's only being used to generate content. So that the information is protected, because we're talking about companies that they want the information to be proprietary. Number two, that we were not going to own any of the content whatsoever. We obviously don't own the inputs because that comes from the customer, but we also made the decision that we will not own the output as well. And so at no point we own any of the content that is being produced and used or inputted into our platform. So if a customer leaves, then we export everything, give it to them, destroy it on our end. We never own it.
Okay. The other thing, okay, so the other question then is, can you use video content to actually train as well, or and is that done through using some technology to actually create a transcript, or do you use the audio off that? Because, for example, right here, right now, we're having this conversation. This has been recorded. It will be uploaded to YouTube. We'd also use a tech to actually do a transcript. And also, of course, it's returned into audio. So we've got three different types of media. So it's a multimedia, recording effectively. So how do you guys operate with that multimedia approach? Can you do video? Can you use video?
Yes. So we have used video, and as an example that I gave before, when there's a lot of written documentation, then we do a process similar to what you were talking about, the transcript. We use the audio of that particular video to generate a transcript, and that transcript end up being an input. There are other technologies that we analyze the video and try to figure out what your emotional levels were and things like that. We're not using any of that. And we just basically turn it into a transcript. Now, there's also a couple of other uses of video, not in the input, but in the output. And one is that some customers said, well, let's say we are creating a training for training people on a particular software platform. And so right now, our platform is not really good at figuring out the interface and creating a lesson on how to use a particular interface. And I'm sure we'll get there, but right now, the customer is better served using a tool like Loom or something like that, explaining that, creating a video, and then adding it to a already generated lesson. So we certainly support that. Or maybe they have a particular video of the CEO speaking, already addressing people they want to open with that. So that can be like the opening slide of an onboarding program. But the other side is in that turning those lessons into videos, because they are short and they want to work as micro-learning modules. So for that, we do have a tool where instead of the output being a slideshow, so to speak, with notes and audio, we can turn those slides into a full frame and then use the audio and use the transcript for closed caption and output a video. And because sometimes they don't want to post it as a learning management system, they want to use it for marketing. And post it somewhere else. And so those are like the three uses of it.
Right, cool. What you mentioned too is rather interesting about software training, for example. There's a lot of companies around the world that will implement, Salesforce, for example, if we use that. And that is then, that particular software is then customized to meet customer requirements. Also, you have people coming and going. Like, for example, I had an editor for 7 years, and he had to document what he did to actually share with my senior editor with the next. He'd been with 7 years, moved on to a startup. And so he actually documented what he did and then shared that. And just like I said, he used Loom and, screen capture and everything else to show what the process was. And one thing I have learned as an entrepreneur is that it's important to have processes and document the processes. So how do you approach, I think you mentioned it a little bit in what we've just been talking about, but how do you document internal processes for companies? Is that part of what your education is? For in other words, a new employee joins and they want to be, how do I do my job? What are the internal things I need to do? Who do I talk to? What are my tasks? Because in the past, it was just in everyone's brain. Whereas today, we've got the ability to do that. And then it becomes, as you mentioned at the beginning, was in the past, it was synchronous, just one way. Now we are creating content that's asynchronous, can be watched on demand when you like, without, it's like live TV versus streaming, really. That's the best way to describe it, isn't it, in one sense? So how do we describe, how do you do that, with onboarding new employees, for example? Is that part of what you do, or is that something?
Yeah, certainly onboarding courses is a very common use case for our platform. Another reason why is that true is because training departments usually, if you either don't have a training department, but if you venture to create one, the very first thing they're going to try to create is an onboarding program, because you're going to want to create a course that affects everybody. So the typical use cases of a training department are onboarding and self-training, and those are the first two use cases. So a lot of people do that. But also as you say, to document processes. Here's the interesting thing about processes is one portion is the creation of that documentation. The other one is the activation of that documentation. And a good example of it is an employee manual, right? Companies have these employee manuals, and it tells you, the things that the benefits that you have and things that are important to the employee. But those things are really on the day-to-day basis not important to you. Until the one day that they're important to you, because you want to know how to take vacations, and you don't know how to do that, and you don't even find the file and things like that. So what some companies have done is use our simulation engine and ingest the employee manual and have it as a sitting agent in the platform. Some folks can go ask direct questions to that employee manual. What are the holidays that we observe? How do you ask for vacation? And then they give you that. So it's a two-part problem. Is the first is how do I document the process, and sometimes we got folks like your editors that went through the process of documenting what they did. and sometimes they don't, and it's really hard to create something out of nothing. So
Oh yeah.
um, that's when we start to get creative. If there was a one-on-one session and it was recorded, can we get a transcript for it?
Yep.
But the second part of the of that knowledge is how do you activate it? You can turn it into a course, and people can learn it in a course instead of reading a manual. But also, can you ask questions when it's pertinent? We have I'll give you an example, a different example. We just recently signed our first credit union here in our state. And the credit union is a bank, and that's really highly regulated. And but
Yep.
banks don't have much of a way to differentiate each other, and because all kind of do the same thing, and at least commercial banks or consumer banks. So this bank is really, really focused on training because they want to make a difference through customer service. So they approached us because they wanted to make sure that the bank tellers not only get the training that they have, but they will also be able to answer questions that are more rare. And so the bank teller will have, certain activities that they always do. But sometimes somebody will come in with a check from Australia, and for example, and then there's like, well, I don't know exactly how to deal with this. They have to pick up the phone, call another department, and kind of get instructions over how to do those more unusual processes. So they want to use our platform because those documents are processed,
Yep.
ingest them, create courses for them, but also have an activation process to the simulation engine so that the bank teller can just ask a question to the engine and ask when that case shows up and be able to serve the customer fast.
Right. Yeah. It's basically enhancing our humanity, really, isn't it? In terms of
Yes.
being able to, the machine is our facilitator. Our Microsoft calls it the co-pilot. There's the AI assistant. So let's go back to the general question is, what is the role of generative AI in the workforce learning? And I think I know what the answer is going to be because we already talked about it. So do you see that role as 50-50? Is it, where do you see the role, and what is the future of AI, I suppose, in workforce learning and in business? Big question, the last one.
No, I actually I like it a lot. And in what we found was that since training is so expensive, and
Yeah.
and customized training is even more expensive. For example, if you were to create a course that is just about your company, hire a team to do that, it will cost you, $20,000 for that one course in the low end. Some cases it could be I've seen as high as $100,000 if it's
Yep.
very specialized. And there's no platform there. That's just the course. That's just the content. And so what we thought is like companies that are large in the thousands of employees, they spend the money to do that. They will have training departments. They call it, learning and development departments now, but they're still training departments, and they have instructional designers, and they have trainers, and they license a learning management system, and to distribute those courses. And they will hire companies to create courses for them, and they will license other courses from Coursera, whatever, and they do that, and that will run them $500,000 all the way to $2 million a year if they have the staff for that.
Yep.
And if the company is small, less than 10 people, less than 50 people, the training is very organic. People just train each other,
Yep.
face to face, and so on. But what we found is like if you were a company between 50 and 500 employees, and you have certain velocity of hiring and certain velocity of training, that you don't have the means to create that learning and development department. Yep. And you're too big to do the organic training. Yep. So that's where we actually focus right now is in those smaller organizations. And I think to answer your question about our role is that we become the learning solution for those smaller organizations that require some sort of scalability of training, but not, without having to go hire a training department.
Right.
So,
yep.
So in overall, to your bigger question of what is the role of a platform like this in overall workforce learning, I think is that even in those bigger companies, you will never talk to a training or learning and development department and say, is everybody okay? Have you addressed everything you need to address? The answer will always be no. They're always overwhelmed. They're always, certain areas, organizations, certain training that they're not addressing. I think that a platform like us can help any organization have customized training that is relevant to their employees, customized to their company, to their industry, at a fraction of the cost, making it accessible for everybody.
Right. So could you use, in other words, you've got a little bit, quite often within an organization, it starts off as, an organization does X, but what it does is along the way, it develops expertise internally that becomes valuable to the outside market. Okay. Is that something you do as well? In other words, you can distill the expertise of an organization or a department of an organization that you can then create external courses that you could charge for. Do you do that sort of thing or not?
No, and the reason why not is because I've been in that business, and that's a brutal business, and
Yep.
business of educational content and of low cost, uh, non-credentialed,
Yes.
and what that means without a degree.
Okay.
Education is really a very difficult business, and and we just saw there's one of the major corporate digital education providers just filed for bankruptcy, and last week. That's a very tough business.
Yeah. Because it's just so freewheeling and unstructured, isn't it, really, in terms of how do you actually encapsulate, because it's a lot of it's actually quite philosophical or quite a different approach to things. So, and uh, that gets hard to structure, doesn't it? And also it takes a lot of time to structure or put together.
And no matter what you do, there's somebody else somewhere in the world with a similar level of expertise that will do it cheaper
Yeah, cool.
or for free.
Yeah, or for free. I know. So we're heading, it's always content wants to be free. So,
Yeah.
all right. So where do you see, obviously, I think the answer lies within the role of generative AI. Is it's essentially, it's a hybrid between the human and the machine to create the course. So in other words, it is our assistant as effectively, or co-pilot. So how do you see the future of generative AI within organizations? Because you're seeing it being used to create content, obviously create courses. Where do you think the future of generative AI is going? I'd be intrigued by your insights and thoughts.
I mean, before we started recording, we have a little bit of this conversation, how this is such a powerful technology, and the impacts of which is hard to determine right now. And but I think that there are a few places that are very evident that is going to have a very big impact. One is customer service. Usually you layer your customer service in tiers. You say tier one is like 80% of your questions, but they're usually just a handful of things, and it's your most expensive customer support because of the volume coming in. And then as you escalate, those groups of people that serve those customers become smaller and become more expert. They're individually more expensive, but because there are fewer of them, they're not as much. I think tier one support is going to be replaced by AI.
Right.
And
Yep.
we're going to get to a point that somebody can call a phone number, talk to a machine that sounds like a human, be okay with that. And just like today, we speak with a lot of bots in text, and we know it's a bot, and we're okay with that, and as long as it's helping us. So that's a place that is very evident that there's going to be displacement. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think there's going to be displacement in programming as well.
Mm.
And we have lived in a world for the past almost 30 years
Yeah.
where no one ever has said they have enough programmers. And everybody was always hungry for more programmers everywhere. And when I talk to our engineers, even the way they're approaching programming has changed. and because of these new tools, and now they don't think about the algorithm they have to write. They think about the prompt they have to write, so the machine writes the algorithm for them.
Yep.
And then they just curate it. So it's making a programmer 3 times, 5 times more effective. And so I can see a world in which people say, well, I may not need a programmer, or not need 10 or 15 programmers. Maybe I can get away with 7.
Yep.
And if you can replace something so specialized, then I think that there's a lot of other things that are not so specialized that you'll be able to replace as well. Now, I don't subscribe to the world in which, X amount of the workers will lose their job and they have nothing else to do, because we have been historically here before when technologies have displaced work. It always happens. So what is exciting is, where are these people going to go? What are the other things that today we cannot even address because we don't have enough people that know those things that these people can help? I think that, or we all can help. I mean, and I think that's going to be very interesting. When I talk to innovative CEOs, they're all asking the question, where does AI fit in my organization? And I'm being very active about challenging the leaders about how AI is going to affect their business in terms of their demand for the product, but also affect their supply in terms of how they produce their services.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's effectively a lot of discussions happening around replacement, whereas the discussion should be more about enhancement, shouldn't it?
Absolutely. Today there isn't a day that I don't use it, and I've always been very productive, but now I can be even more productive. I can produce a lot more volume of work, not bad volume of work, and but effective. I do believe the power is in the combination.
Yeah.
And but now I think there are also places where technology have made things worse. And I think hiring today in the digital age, technology ruined hiring.
Yeah.
And the process of hiring doesn't serve anybody. It doesn't serve the employer, and doesn't serve the applicant.
Yeah.
And I think I'll be ready to go backwards in that particular area.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing that's really interesting is that AI can't do soft skills. In other words, nuanced things very, very well. In other words, humans, it doesn't mean that AI can't facilitate insights that then the human can apply. But I think the challenge is, and in hiring, quite often it's the quiet, skilled, experienced communication skills of the person that's doing the interview are going, there's something wrong going on here. I can't pick it, but or the background doesn't add. It's just, so there's a lot of soft skills. And one area that fascinates me, and has for a long time, since I grew up with a father that talked a lot, but he didn't listen very well, is that I think one of the most powerful communication skills you can have is actually listening. And listening is not a singularity, is actually a very nuanced skill. So where do you see training soft skills with machines or AI versus harder skills? Where do you see that sitting?
I actually think that AI can help with soft skills, and by being an empathetic and non-judgmental trainer for soft skills. And we have seen examples of that already, experiments that have surfaced where they do doctors talking to patients, and then machines talking to patients, and they find that the AI is quite more empathetic than the doctor. And so if that's true, it means that also you probably do the reverse. I can probably try to train somebody in the soft skills, and with consistency, with built-in empathy, and without no judgment. So I do think there's a place there I think the places where we have to be careful is in the abuse of the uh, of the of the tool. We have in history, we have proven that removing friction from content development has brought very good things, but also brought bad things. So uh, we always thought that email was a great thing when it came out, and we were able to communicate faster and get those ideas there quicker. And today we don't know what to do with so much email. So now I got a tool that can write even more emails and getting out there. I don't think that's going to help anyone. I don't think we need more communication.
Yeah.
What I do think is that we can use it to address things that we cannot address. And the problem that we're tackling at Pete is a problem that small organizations just live with.
Right.
They just stumble and live with it and until they either don't survive or they grow enough to be able to afford a training department.
Right.
And I think that's a perfect use to use of technology that's addressing a problem that before you couldn't even address.
Yeah. Okay, so there's another question I have regarding, and it's a bit about engagement, I suppose, and learning. Learning's not just about facts and information. In fact, one of the most powerful ways to teach is to involve stories. I watched an interview recently between Yuval Harari, the author of *Sapien*, the Israeli historian, with Mustafa Suleiman, and they were having a discussion. And Yuval Harari is really worried about that. If AI can start making up stories, because stories are at the core of being human, and you only have to look at, the legends that are told, the stories that are shared, that happen around campfires over millennia. How do you guys use stories within your training processes? Where do stories sit in terms of training and education? Because quite often the best way for people to remember is through a story, because it's emotional, it touches a soul. A machine hasn't lived or has suffered pain or had joy. It can get rid of cognitive bias, as we've been talking about. In other words, doctors can be really shit at actually bedside manner, because they actually are crap at listening, or they like white people instead of black people, or whatever, green people versus yellow people. They don't like old people, they like young people. So, and they're brought up in certain schools. So we've got all these cognitive biases that machine can just either heighten or amplify. So let's go back to the original question. How do you use stories with generative AI and education? I'd be interested.
That is such a cool idea. And the answer is we don't use it today, but you just gave me a very cool idea. And because I have used generative AI to create stories, and it's quite good at it. And we like to think of stories of something very unique, but there's a lot of people that study stories, and we found that there are only so many archetypes and there's so many arches. And we talked about the hero's journey before is a very specific formula, and that is quite successful. And there's archetypes that you can do there, and all of that is trainable. And I have used it to create stories just for my own amusement. So it's not very far-fetched to have a setting in which you could tell our platform that this particular learning outcome should be achieved through story.
Yeah.
That would be super cool.
Yeah. Well, it's for me, when I was, starting to learn to actually stand on stage and speak, I stood up there and I had charts and graphs behind me and information and, data. And then I realized that the engagement with the audience really wasn't happening. I wasn't touching their soul. So I realized that I needed to start, especially with a story. And one traditional way of education now and learning is present a story, make a point. Present a story, create a point. And this is a much more powerful way, because people remember the story. Because the reality is, in education and also presentation, which is what you guys are all about, is that people forget what you told them, but they won't forget how you made them feel.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
the other
Yes, I
parts,
mean that's the coolest idea I heard in a long time. I I kind of mad at myself that I didn't have that idea before, and it's totally plausible.
yeah. Well, it is because I'm in the middle of writing about is AI a tech bubble waiting to happen, right? Uh, but then you go look back, okay, so the thing about stories, they also, and then we have history, and you know, basically Yuval Harari is very much about stories and history because history is people's recollection of what happened. In other words, out of that come stories, which are not necessarily what we call truth, but it's an emotional capture and a recall of what they thought they were seeing or hearing, right? So if you go and look at, okay, what were the bubbles of history? In other words, you go back in history, and out of history come stories. So, and then they become powerful because then you go, well, where's the pattern in this noise that I can then apply to this new rise? And we as humans are pattern recognition machines. The other challenge we have here is that there is so much information now that trying to see the signal in the noise is almost impossible sometimes. And I believe generative AI can help us see the signal and noise better, but then the human's got to make more sense of it. So we go from information to wisdom. And that's what intrigues me as well is how can AI make us wiser?
I love that idea. I think it can. And um, how do we get there? It's gonna be a fascinating journey.
Yep. Well, I'm just in the middle of trying to write I'm writing a blog post. Can AI make us wiser? And I'm just really looking forward to what I unearth because you end up with a draft, an outline, then you start diving into here and there. The other part, okay, this is the other part I want to raise, which I'll be intrigued by what your thoughts are on this. In that we have this sort of productivity pandemic. In other words, how efficient was I today? In other words, did I get 10 things done? In other words, we're treating humans like machines, right? Now, that's just another industrial revolution where we put children into factories and make sure that they don't take a break. Amazon, distribution centers are essentially modern slavery, right? They measure how many times they go to the bloody toilet, right? So really, creativity is not about productivity. Creativity is actually about enjoying the journey and creating something that's different. I'm interested in your thoughts um, well, I was just been raving and ranting, really, but it's just a thought bubble. But really, is being human all about being more productive, or is it actually more about actually enjoying the journey of production and creation?
I, I will have to agree with you that being human is not about being more productive,
Yeah,
and it's about enjoying the journey. And but sometimes that journey is being more productive. Like, I enjoy being more productive, and I like to work,
yeah,
and I have really enjoyed having more productivity at my fingertips, and I'll be able to deliver more work. But at the same time, I have been trying to work fewer hours and step out of my station and take breaks during the day. And which in an office environment is harder to do because you feel like you have to be always on because people are watching. And so I think it allows me to work fewer hours and not lose productivity so that I can be more human.
yep,
And so that I can take a break and watch a show or play the guitar or have a longer lunch with my wife and spend more time with my children. So it's a hard it's very personal decision, and I think that is very, especially here in America, which we are so obsessed with work,
yep.
and it's very easy to then work even harder. We have these phones, and that's supposed to open other windows into our life, and what they do is make us work harder and be connected all the time. So I think all of humans will have to be a lot more conscious about how we use our time, and use these powerful tools so that we can have more time, and
Yeah.
not so that we can create, so that we can work harder.
Yeah. I think the tension rises between what I call quality and quantity. In other words, I want to produce, 7 widgets, right? Or I want to create 7 paintings. Or I want to create 5, a movie series, for example, right? I think one of the America's famous Hollywood directors said, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. He said that as humans, I think doing something you really enjoy, in other words, leaning into your curiosity, is actually much better than actually doing something you hate every day. That's not being human, right? So what was really interesting, he said that not only need to fall in love with what you do, you need to fall in love with the process of what you do. And that can be a meandering journey, okay, a little bit like the King Arthur's knights, the knights of the Holy Grail. In other words, they stepped into a forest where there was no path. And that path is never going to be straight. Yet, as humans, we're trying to get certainty and create freeways instead of byways.
It's so beautiful.
And I've thought about this for a while, but also I had a chat with Ken Schmidt, who's the guy behind the resurrection of Harley Davidson in the 80s. And this is a story which I loved, and I've read his book, and the stories are that one of the joys of being a motorcyclist is that you're out in nature, you can smell the cut grass, you can get the rain turns up, the thunder comes down around you. It's a sensory experience. And he calls the freeways the super slabs, and you don't want to go on those as a motorcyclist. You actually want to take the back roads and discover the cafes, the service stations where you find interesting characters. You want to stop, and chat with other motorcyclists, stop for a beer somewhere, not have too many because your motorcyclist's dangerous. But he said, when I lay out a map to get to where I want to go, he said, I will work out a way which avoids the freeways. And what I want to do is I want to get to here, but the fun is not in arriving. The fun is in the going and the experience and the journey. In other words, when you arrive, you quite often be underwhelmed. So this is where I think education, we'll go back to education here, is that I quite often love the slow journey of discovery, of crafting from a headline that I thought about, while having a coffee or chatting to someone like yourself or reading in the morning in bed, whatever. But I love the slow, almost if productivity. In other words, you're still productive, but reality is, I think we just don't want to get lost in being so productive that we treat ourselves like machines. And anyway, I'm ranting and raving. It's actually supposed to be about you, and I'm talking about me. But the reality is that I think we need to make sure that we don't lose our humanity in the intersection of machines and people.
I could not agree more. And I think that technologies of the last 20 years have really challenged us in that.
Yeah.
And is it, as you know, I worked at a university, and it's so interesting to see go into a open space and see a lot of kids just sitting down on their phones without talking to each other. I see even sending text to each other when they're right next to each other. Or when you go to a concert and everybody's with a phone in there watching it through the small screen instead of watching it, directly experiencing what's happening right there and then. Um, uh, is all these technologies have made open new doors, but also have made us more depending on them. And so For me, I try to detach and put rules for how I use everything, and
Yep.
so that I can be more human and more understanding, maximize these technologies when I need to, and which can also help with my curiosity, and because um, some days I don't have an interesting person to talk to like you, but I can talk to a machine and ask him questions, and then it will open a new world for me, and it will help me with a task that otherwise will take me a very long time to do. But that doesn't mean that then I will work more hours. I keep going back to, okay, how much am I spending here?
Yep.
And in regards to our business, what I like to see our tool make a difference is that the reaction of smaller companies into solving the problem of learning and training, is that they go to the leaders, to the experts, and trying to turn them into trainers, and because they know they have the knowledge, and that sometimes can be a good thing because they happen to be good trainers and they happen to love to teach. Sometimes it can be a nightmare for them because it's not what they're
Not what they're
were
good at.
trained to do, and it takes them away from the job that they are really good at, and everybody loses when that happens. And to be able to empower that person with a tool that will allow them to translate their knowledge into the materials, be a good training experience, and then walk away from it and go back to your job, and solving a problem you could not solve before. And I think that makes them more human, and that allows them to be more productive and than they otherwise they would be.
Yeah, I love it. So, yeah, we should be using generative AI and AI to actually make us more humans, and we need to have a lot more conversations about what that means and what that looks like.
Yes.
And we didn't set any guardrails up for social media, and look where we are today, right? Democracy threat and disinformation is rampant. Spamming and scamming is just global at industrial scale. We go to a restaurant and no one has a conversation. They just look at their phones. Maybe we need to have rules like, if you go to a restaurant and the first one to pick up their phone picks up the tab, simple rules. But
I hope everybody listens to you on that one. That's a good one.
the other thing that I've been interested in your thoughts on this, and generative AI is creeping into software, and the pandemic actually accelerated remote working, didn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. The thing is scaring me a little bit, and it's about productivity, is what we call surveillance software for remote workers, in that they're measuring keystrokes. Yep. So surveillance software, in other words, remote working software to make humans more productive. In other words, they're not going and making love to their wife in the middle of the day instead of actually, stroking the keyboard. Right. So
I don't think, if you don't trust your staff to do their job, then don't have a remote environment.
I know I don't have it. My editor left and he joined a company where they actually they use remote work monitoring software. My golf buddy, she actually has a company and she's using remote work. She had about 3 people leave after she introduced it. And I'm going, look, if I put surveillance software monitoring me, I would fire me, right? Because I am not a machine. I can't imagine the complete joylessness of working in an Amazon warehouse, but some people don't have a choice. But at any rate, but this is where AI is being woven into surveillance as well.
For sure, I don't. I have a hard time imagining an organization like that. We are a remote first organization. We do have an office, and we go a couple times a week, only in the mornings. And what I think about the face-to-face work is you do different kind of work. You use that time to bond, to have more unstructured conversations, because the Zoom world brought a lot of efficiency into the conversation because there's no chit chat and there's that, but then every conversation have a purpose, and that's great for certain things but terrible for others.
Yeah.
And you need unstructured conversations and to find out new things. So we do go to, for the folks that live here in Orlando, Florida, we do go to the office once a week. I go twice in the mornings, and then for the rest of it, half of our employees are around the world, and so we use remote first. So if I wouldn't trust our employees to do the work that we ask them to do, and just manage them by objectives, then we will have a larger office that everybody goes every day, and and have cubicles and that kind of stuff. And I left that world, and I don't want to come back to that. Listen, Jeff, I've been going to offices for 30 years. If I never ever touch an office ever again, I'll be fine. And but I do believe that it's important to have a human connection, real human connection. And I like to think that the pandemic brought our humanity out, and make us more aware that we can be connected with the people we want to be connected, and then remotely if we need to, because now this technology, this video technology is everywhere. We're having a conversation with you on the other side of the world. That's amazing.
Yes.
And but at the same time, step out of it and enjoy your friends and in the real world, and do other things. And that's how I took it. And I hope the rest of the world is doing the same thing, because life is too short to be glued to a computer. And I've been behind the computer since I'm 8 years old.
Yeah, I think we're still, because we've got human evolution's been slow, but technology revolution's been fast. And I think that is actually raising big questions. And this is what I think AI does do. It actually is allowing us and making us ask questions about what makes us human and what's important if we reflect. And I think that's our challenge today, is
Yes,
that,
sir.
and I'm intrigued by this intersection of humanity and the machine. Yeah, so to wrap things up, I'm going to ask you a question. What brings you most deepest joy, and you would do for free if you had all the money in the world? That's the last question. Okay, just reflect on that. I just posed that. So where do you see the future of education? Because you've been involved in, Full Sail University. Now you've gone online. You've seen, remote online training, in-classroom training. Where do you see the future of education going? I mean, I'll be intrigued by your vision and thoughts around that.
So I'm actually very hopeful about the future of education. I think that most traditional education work for some of learners, and it's terrible for a lot of them. And what we would have, I often think about folks that I met along the way that were incredibly talented, incredibly smart, and not good students. And I always think about, it's not that they were bad students, it's that the system was bad for them. In traditional education has been very unforgiving for people that don't fit the format. And we see that more and more. And then in higher education, it's even more accentuated, wanting to fit people into a particular mold, and try to get them to learn. So I think that my hope would be that this technology will allow everyone to maximize their potential in
Yep.
whatever they want to learn.
Yep.
And so that instead of the constant being how long you are sitting in that classroom or going to that institution, but your level of mastery is really all over the place, that the level of mastery will be the fix, and how long you stand there will be variable.
Yep.
But all that really to say, I really do hope that everybody gets to learn the way they can maximize their learning, and being able to pursue what they want to pursue at the level of mastery that they want to have. And instead of having a system impose that on them. So for me, the future of education is bright, because up until right now, there was not really the tools to make that happen. And it's not that people didn't want to, it's just that we needed to create systems that will work for the majority of people. And but now we have the tools to create systems that will work for everybody. So
Right,
that for me is exciting about the future of education.
right. So what you're doing is you're facilitating, enabling people to actually follow their curiosity more easily and removing the friction by giving them the right tools and technology.
Yeah, thank you. Very eloquent.
And I remember opening a web browser, Netscape, in 1995. And as I opened it up, despite the fact it took me 20 different pages to get to some information that was actually useful, because the search engines back then were crap. What Google does today is just amazing. And then we have Search GPT arising as well. But I remember opening the browser and I went, I will no longer need to go to a library ever again, except maybe to find a quiet space. And that's pretty well what's worked out. So, but I think what you're doing with Pete is just amazing. And obviously, I can see your passion shining through because you're still doing what you do. You create technology to do it better. And you're obviously, as Joseph Campbell said, what's your purpose in life? And he said, follow your bliss. I think you're following your bliss.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
And I look forward to seeing more of that. Now, the final question is, which
Yes.
I raised, I just wanted your subconscious to work away. You must be, I'm sure you've got a quick answer to this, but if you had all the money in the world, what would you do every day that would bring you deep joy?
So I don't think it will be one thing. I mean, I think,
Good.
but I will like to have certain things more present in my life. And I like to travel and spend time in other cultures. I've been to 35 countries. I speak 3 languages, so I like to do more of that. Be able to take a 3 month trip somewhere, really get to know a country very deeply. Go to your country and really travel and understand it. That would be amazing. But I wouldn't want to travel 100% of the time. So I would want to do that. I like music to be more present in my life, be able to get better at the instruments that I play, and ultimately, all of that I can throw away for more time with my family. Family is the most important thing in my life. I have children. I have a wife for 27 years that I really want to spend more time with, and I love working at home because I get to have lunch with her every day. And but doing more things together will be amazing. And visiting other family members in other parts of the world. So family, travel, and music, I think if we were to summarize in 3 words.
Cool. Well, I don't think happiness and joy is a singularity.
No.
So it's basically, I think, creating a tapestry of things that bring you joy to create a life that is full. And thank you for sharing that. And I usually find that the people I talk to are, some of the most intelligent people on the planet, interesting, have great life experiences, usually don't have a problem saying what brings them joy. And you bitted that. But I would highly suggest that you go and spend 3 months somewhere, but have a home base.
Yes.
And I've done that at Lake Como. And I did that for 3 months. I've done it in Eastern Europe. I experimented with the approach, which was a lot of traveling, moving over 3 months versus a base that can then go out and have adventures around that. So I call it the 10-year, 10 hub strategy. So I would recommend go and do it. It's just
I
fantastic.
love that. I'm gonna plan it like that, just like that, Jeff.
Well, but for me, what I discovered the first time I did it, I moved too much. It was 3 months away. Hard to be productive, hard to be creative. And it was also quite stressful finding another place. Whereas the next way I did it was Lake Como in winter in a villa overlooking the lake and the mountains where I worked in mornings and we had adventures in the afternoon with my partner and I. And we went and did Florence, Venice, Milan, but we basically had a home base to do it from, and that worked. So it was, then there's certain requirements around that. We won't go into that now, but yeah, I would recommend that. It's the digital nomad's a misnomer. It's more the digital settler is maybe a better term we should call it, but anyway, but
Love it. Thank you so much for that.
Louise, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure. I've maybe talked too much,
No.
and it's been fascinating. I love what you're doing, and you're allowing people to be more human, so they, well, to be more productive, so they can be more human and learn, and hopefully follow their curiosities more and be bigger and better humans. So thank you very much. It's awesome
Thank you.
doing it.